No matter how much you love the idea of a short-run kit, that kit might not love you back. But if you can't win, sometimes you can still learn something. For many of us, a brand new kit means such promise. Open the box, see all those gleaming parts all lined up for you, and you think, this time, the build is going to be perfect. Oh, I had big plans for this little kit. Just look at it. It's a gem. It had canopy masks. It was going to be built in a weekend, painted in a day, and the stand, oh man, that was going to be a thing of beauty, holding up the perfectly finished model. Well, my friends, this one fought me. It fought me every step of the way. I started the build of this 72nd scale X-20 space plane innocently enough, but the fight started right after I got to snipping. Okay, maybe there were a few issues with the mold, maybe this wasn't the best model out there, but the subject was cool, the box art was cool, and all the cool kids are really building all them Eastern European kits, but, well, every part had to be shaped, sanded, and cleaned up. Every part. Well, what are you going to do? I just stuck with it, and I was surprised the cockpit went together fine. At least I think it did. And for a 72nd scale cockpit from a short run kit, I have to say, not bad. Not bad at all. And that was pretty much the highlight of the build, because that cockpit, decent as it was, just did not fit into the fuselage. And I checked. But nope, I couldn't find a problem, so I took out the rasp and I filed down the sides and I made it fit. And then I put the canopy on, and that wouldn't fit either. And somehow the instrument panel either ended up in the wrong place, or that part was too tall, and by this time I had run out of cares. I had run out of cares to give this model, and I was thinking about my options. Now, that last one would have been fun, but I couldn't get that bass out of my mind. I really wanted to try that, but the model? Well, I'm sure I could have put another few weeks into it, fix all of the imperfections, and then rescribe the whole thing, but I was sure that this would not end up being a triumph at the end of the day. So I decided to turn this less than perfect kit into an opportunity to try some new things and see what trouble I could get into. I was going to simply paint the model and make it look scorched like a real spacecraft, and then I was going to try to make that Earth stand look like, well, the Earth. The model started with a coat of black primer, followed with a very patchy post-shade and marbling of light gray paint. And this was followed by several thin coats of NATO black to dial things back a little bit. Now, the real X-20, it never made it beyond the wooden mock-up stage, so I had to look for some pictures of space shuttles and the new X-37, and I wanted to see what their undersides looked like when they were weathered by re-entry. And to me, it all looked kind of chalky and random. And what surprised me the most was that in some cases the centers of the tiles were scorched while the edges looked darker and newer. I figured I could try a few products to get me there, but I was keen to work a little more with my AK weathering pencils. What I liked about trying these is that I could easily add more pigment to a panel, and I could just as easily take it away with a damp brush. I could also go over dried areas again and again, and as a last resort, I could wipe almost all of it off and start over. Now, to be honest, I wasn't exactly happy with my results, but then again, this was the first time I had tried anything like this. I mean, no doubt that the underside was scorched. It was definitely weathered. But the next time I might do more with the panel lines and then attempt all of this with my airbrush dialed way down. But still, it never hurts to try. Now, with that all done and blended, it was time to tackle the base. My big idea for the base was to paint it from the inside in order to take advantage of the outer plastic shine. But this meant that I had to plan everything out of order because it's in reverse. You'll see in a second. So I masked the globe part in order to paint the black surround. And for some reason, I thought this was going to be a lot tougher than it was. But what helped is that there's a small lip between the ring part and the globe. So it actually made things fairly easy to mask around this part. But most importantly, once this was done, I didn't have to do any masking anymore because each color would sort of go over the other ones. So now the fun can begin. I took a look at pictures of the Earth from orbit, and I really liked how the clouds sometimes dominate the rest of the colors. And they're far from uniform, which is good, and they are never in straight lines, which is also something to keep in mind. I decided to paint the clouds using lacquer paint because I did not want them to melt and mix with the layers of acrylic paint I was going to use later on. And the technique, if you could call it that, was fairly simple. I ripped up some spongy material, held it in tweezers. I dipped the paint into the bottle. Next, I dabbed off most of the paint before attempting to paint inside the globe. My thinking is that it's always easier to build up the color rather than try to take it away if there was a mistake. And then it was about taking a look at some of the pictures and trying to imitate what I saw. So I started with some tiny dots of cloud, and then I'd occasionally scrape the white paint slightly in a rounded pattern. It's actually better to have it very uneven. It's actually better to have streaks of no paint. So I suggest you go for that random look. Take your time and build things up gradually. Once the white was dry, I then took out a couple of different sand and brown colors as well as a couple of different greens. I got out a cheapo palette to help me mix the paints and to keep the whole mess wet while I was applying it. And my theory here was that I wanted to have few pure colors, and I was trying to mix them at the edges. And when I accidentally made a hard edge and that would dry, I would take more paint, more thinner, and I would work that edge to blend it with the colors surrounding it. And if you look closely, each continent is a bunch of random colors that have blended at the edges to make a natural looking landmass. And I found that my first coat was somewhat thin, but this was one of those happy mistakes you keep hearing about. Placing another layer actually helped blend and mix things even better. And once that was all dry, I took the globe over to the paint booth and built up a few layers of blue with the airbrush. And for this scale, this is a pretty passable Earth from orbit. So, the model? Not perfect. But this exercise was a perfect example of taking a few risks in order to get something out of a pooched build. And yes, it's always better to be pleasantly surprised when things do well, but don't forget, we do some of our most important learning right after we fall on our butts. I'll admit, there were times I wanted to see if this model could actually fly, but I was happy to have stuck with it because I got to try a few things, I learned a few things, and ultimately I ended up with a pretty unique looking model for the shelf. Well, until next time, thanks for watching, everyone.